Okay, so we start with the Qigong. 愿得归给是故君见者，自见等巴楞给杂瓦如来巴通涅贝巴杜玛伊，古巴见巴等巴金给罗，连君念贝德为等三地，心度涅卡等真是给你。念zen gindu nimbo lembe lo, gimshi me bar gyawa jingi lo, luso yawa chui chumbu shin, nyodu jibi jiwa jamba dang, shiwe jizu lu da drima shin, karna lendu jishin jangwa la, Nyeba nimbo nye 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 bezo, jashin jawa nang jang pongwa dang, Tizo dada drubar jeba la, Tadu batan denpa jingi lo, Chibe minam dugna kungi go, Ide mirun simbe punzogi, Nimeri ne tarbe dewa la, Tunye chenpa gewa jingi lo, Nanda samba deyi jamba yi, Tendan shishin bayu chenpa yi, Tembe sawa soso darbala, Jubanyen barje barjingilo, Raini zizo luwa jishindu, Maikyo jowa kinjan dedawa, Tone jowa jowe kyugirwe, Janju zunju ju barjingilo, Sensan ge kyansu tindang sunla, Komba mena janju midru bar, Lebar dini geze dombala, Zumba jobo lo barjingilo, Lobe yula yinwa shi she shi, Yanda dun la si shin she ban, Shine la gun sun du de we lama, Nyu shu gyu la gya wa jingilo, Tumu lan jan de du gyu ba na, Te ba kun gi sho gyu do she te, Te sa ge wu shu no da ba de, Te la yi du ju ba jingilo, Te se ngu du nam di ju be shi, Nam da tam si tong ba sun wa la, Che ma mi be ni ba ni gyo ni nu, So tan je de sun wa jinggi lo, Tene gyu de nimbo rin ni ki, De nan chi shin tong ne sun ba yi, Tun shin ne jo sho le mi wa ra, Dang le sun shin ju ba jinggi lo, Dambe shenyen dan su shin ju gui dan nan sha tin shin. Nimbi bardo chube so, nyawara shiwa jingi lap tu so. Jawa kundu yanda lama dan, jame chigi bella lang shi. Saran langi yende razo ne, doje shangi go ban yor do. Sangye Shiran Soge Chanam La Chancho Pardu Dani Gyasuti Dagi Chenyen Gi Besanam Gi Dola Bencha Sangye Drupar Shon Sangye Shiran Soge Chanam La Chancho Pardu Dani Gyasuti Dagi Chenyen Gi Besanam Gi Dola Bencha Sangye Drupar Shon Sangye Charan Sage Chanam La Chancho Bardo Tamni Gyasuji Dagi Jinyan Gi Besanan Gi Dola Bencha Sangye Drubar Saji Burgi Juji Medakam Rira Linjin Ninde Gyamadi Sangye Jingu Migde Uwargi Dogunanda Jinla Jabara Shohidam Guru Ranam Mandala Kam Niryatayam. Okay. So I think we reached verse 12 or 13, something like that. Well, we have, there's a handout, right? Okay. I have been thinking about, this verse that we've been reading, this chapter on suffering, and
there were two times when the question came up. First one was Richard, second time was me. And that was kind of, I don't know, I mean, I don't want to, you know, um, make a lot out of it, but it was kind of a reaction that I thought about, and that is how to come to terms with the idea of suffering and how to understand suffering. Largely, I think how to relate to it in terms of, I guess your overall outlook almost on your life and how to incorporate that idea into your everyday thinking and that sort of thing. And I sort of got the impression that, and I'm not suggesting there's anything you know wrong with it. It just I think it raised an issue, and the issue is like how far to take the idea of suffering, and whether or not we should think about anything in our lives as sort of enjoyable and sort of that's appropriate as a Buddhist, or whether we should be this dour-faced kind of Buddhist who just walks around thinking that everything is horrible and so I don't happen to think that. I don't believe I do. And my experiences with Tibetans and with Westerners who are interested in Tibetan Buddhists is that the Tibetans themselves, not to say that every Tibetan is, a master of Buddhist practice and theory, but they're very happy people for the most part, much happier than we Westerners tend to be. We tend to be a lot more serious about the Dharma. The Dharma sort of, we take it more kind of literally and more, strictly, and especially in the beginning stages, that's kind of typical, I think. So that kind of is at odds with this sort of dynamic. I mean, you can read into that kind of what you like. But I mean, I've been thinking about this because the question came up, and so I think it's a legitimate question, and I don't know that I have it completely sorted out in my own mind, but I think it's worth considering. And I think that what I found in this particular chapter of Ayadeus is that his presentation of suffering, kind of over this entire chapter, is not the typical way in which I am familiar with how to meditate on samsaric suffering as it's presented sort of more traditionally in the Lamrim practice. So I don't know, I don't want to digress too much about it, but so there is an element, there's several sort of kind of areas of significance. So one is, well, how does the idea about one's attitude toward samsara, how's it meant to be understood if you're a, quote, Hinayanist or conventional or traditional, or what is it, that follows the Veda, the Theravada view, versus how's the Mahayanist supposed to approach his or her samsaric existence, and are they significantly different, or are there elements where they have things in common? That's also an area that deserving of reflection. And so I think, and I kind of touched on it last time, or I tried to, which is to say that because you're a Mahayanist, because as a Mahayanist you're supposed to have this idea that you are you're willing to endure samsaric existence as a necessity in order to be able to cultivate the Mahayan path, which involves interacting with others and trying to benefit others, and that that benefiting, that's a whole interesting dynamic, which is the Mahayanist is altruistic, and so seeking to benefit others is to some degree the ultimate goal, but it's also, there is a self-interested aspect of benefiting others, in that it's an exercise that you're supposed to engage in order to become better at helping others. And so that's kind of the essence of the Mahayana path, is sort of training yourself to become more skilled at benefiting others. And the only way you can do that is by practice, by being involved with others, and trying to become more skillful at it. And so that sets you off from the Theravada tradition. That's not really a major aim in that school. But in the course of doing that, and I mentioned that one passage from the Bodhisattva which said that just because you're committed to being in samsara in order to benefit others, that doesn't mean that you should not think of, and even uses the word nirvana. There's a phrase of turning your back on nirvana, or thinking of nirvana as something to be rejected. There's the idea that, well, I am, kind of foregoing my own nirvana for the benefit of others, and that can be misinterpreted in thinking that you don't need to be particularly concerned about, that as a goal per se. And yet, as Asanga said, that's wrong, because you need to think of nirvana as a desirable outcome for yourself. It's just that what the peace that nirvana represents is there is there is a Mahayana version of it, so to speak. So there's a phrase, I'm trying to remember what it's called, something, the idea of ending, putting an end to conditioned suffering, the suffering conditioned existence. That does not occur until you achieve Buddhahood. So you're sort of enduring, or you're tolerating that aspect of imperfect existence. I think there's a phrase which is Shiwei Ying. Shiwei Ying means the realm of peace, right? The realm of peace. So I'm really digressing, but the idea is that the realm of peace, if you try to manifest it, prematurely, then that is contrary to the Hinayana goal. I'm sorry, Mahayana goal, because it puts you in a state of quiescence where you have no possibility of benefiting others. But that realm, that quiescence that nirvana represents, if you would enter it from the level of the Dharmakaya, then it's not a passive state. It's a state of quiescence, but it's dynamic, and from that state you are able to, manifest physical forms without leaving that quiescent state. So, but you can't enter it until you have achieved the ability to achieve the Sambhogakaya. Anyway, that gets kind of very technical in terms of the Mahayana path. So that brings you back to the idea of, well, how do you sort of operate, during the time prior to that, while you're in samsara. And there's a very interesting, I remember, I translated Bodhisattva Bhumi, and there's some sections in it which for me were very, very informative. One is the chapter on reality, on the Yogacara version of emptiness, and what that knowledge provides as a as a kind of an attribute. That knowledge of emptiness is what it really gives you the ability to navigate samsara without being, you know, adversely impacted by samsara. So that if you know, or if you have a sense of the lack of, you know, particularly my new point of view, lack of inherent existence of anything, you can remain sort of cognizant of that ultimate nature, and then you still operate. You're able that awareness of the lack of self-existence gives you a kind of equanimity that would not otherwise be possible, and it allows you to, you know, be able to have the kind of self-control that doesn't provoke the mental friction. So that's you know, huge. A lot of people tend to think that emptiness sort of is contrary to the idea of compassion, and that you have to sort of, you know, focus on compassion a lot, because emptiness is sort of takes you in a place where you don't see any importance, because what people aren't real. I'm not real, you know. So what's the point? What are we, you know, what kind of, there's no suffering isn't real. So why are we, you know, concerned about it? I mean, I don't know how many people think that way, but I do remember some people feeling that emptiness, the idea of emptiness, sort of kind of takes you away from the idea of the need to be concerned about others' suffering. So anyway, so then the point is that the idea of suffering, right? The idea of suffering is not minimized at all. In fact, there's a section in the latter part of this chapter where, which I really want to read, but we're not really at the point yet where it's appropriate, where it's after all the verses have been explained, and this is then in Chandrakirti's discussion, and he addresses the idea of how it's important. Why does after all, this text on 400 verses, the full title is 400 verses on the Bodhisattva practice, and so it really raises the area of conduct. So if we draw back in terms of the overall path and instruction and practices that relate to the path, sort of the Lamrim system, you know, puts the domain of conduct on one side, and usually associates that with Yogacara literature, with the Yogacara Bhumi, and so typically they say the 5 Maitreya treatises, that those are sort of the main Indian, you know, shastras that are the source of the teachings for conduct and bodhisattva activities and practice. And then you go to the other side and you have view, and then that's essentially Nagarjuna's domain, and then, you know, Nagarjuna, you know, includes other Chandrakirti, Shantideva, and so on. And those are focused mainly on cultivating and developing understanding of emptiness. So we don't really associate the idea of practice and you know, bodhisattva practice with that side of the instruction. So, but there, you know, not necessarily in the, you know, the classic works of Nagarjuna, although the Ratnavali, for instance, the Ratnavali is a verse text, which is supposed to be instruction for a king. He does, you know, present some kind of teachings about practice, and then so does Aryadeva to some degree in this text, especially the first 8 chapters are kind of preparatory in nature. And then Chandrakirti, in his commentary here, at the end of this chapter, he has some really beautiful comments about why a bodhisattva, in particular, needs to cultivate an awareness of his or her own samsaric suffering as part of, the Mahayana approach. So, it's obviously relevant. It's challenging. It's something that you really it's subtle. It's somewhat sophisticated because this sort of dynamic between not seeking to end your own samsara condition and purposely engaging in samsara on behalf of others. And so how do you kind of resolve the tension or the possibly seeming conflict in those kind of perspectives? So that's very relevant to what we're talking about here. And I guess maybe I'll leave it at that. But yeah, okay.
So with all of this,
Yeah.
your knowledge of all of these different sources of discussion on this, is it appropriate for us, even for just sutra practitioners, to enjoy, to celebrate the good things in life, knowing that yes, we are living in samsara.
Right. That's where it started, right? I was saying.
We're going into the dark night of the soul and just saying, oh my God.
Well,
and how do we enhance our own abilities so that we're actually productive and useful to others if we are, looking into this vortex of negativity?
Yeah. Well,
and I'm thinking of Langer Tengpa always is talked about as having the nickname Grim Face. And when asked, he said, well, I just cannot ever smile because I'm always contemplating everyone's suffering.
Yeah.
And yet what's he realized how do we find the motivation if it's always looking at this darkness?
Well, yeah. Right. I'm in agreement with you, and I've been sort of being a little long-winded, but trying to kind of address that kind of point. And I think the way you kind of described it in terms of those two elements, I would say neither of them is really appropriate. Neither should we celebrate our lives and go out and have picnics every weekend and plan that kind of a life. Nor should we be going through our life, with a sense of depression or sadness. That I don't think that either of those options is what we're aiming for. Is kind of what I wanted to say. I don't know that it's my place to sort of kind of try to give you my version of it. I think each of us should try to figure that out for himself or herself. But I think it's important. I think it's I would say this as a practical comment. I would say that one of the things about Dharma that my own experience is that as I have tried to kind of wrestle with or try to comprehend the implications, because that's what we're talking about, implications of teaching certain teachings. Understand the main idea that's being expressed. That can be easy, but then there's sort of, well, how does it sort of apply to all these different elements of a complex life? And one of the things I would say is you shouldn't be too hard on yourself if you can't sort of puzzle everything out, right? I think initially you should simply try to collect as much of an understanding of the teaching, and that there is a kind of over time. I think it's really important that allowing, and I'm not saying that just, I mean, there's a certain continuity, a certain persistence of your effort to sort of delve more and more into the Dharma. And I think that cumulatively, over time, your understanding will become more clear, for lack of a better word, and you'll have a better ability to be able to sort of make the kind of distinctions that we're sort of raising here, and that's the best way. That's really the best way to reach that point. So the idea is that it doesn't matter how much intellect you have, nor how much reasoning you do, that there's a certain kind of experiential aspect to practice and to Dharma that you have to give yourself time to sort of, there is an idea, there is the idea of maturation, of development. And, and that's, that has a whole, there's a very broad range to that process of maturation. And that, I personally believe, I think, I hope with some validity, that, that's definitely, something to look forward to, that it's more than possible. One of the biggest things about the Dharma to me is it's like whatever your idea is, whatever your outlook is, whatever your understanding is, whatever your intellect is at any given point, that's really not sufficient. And that you should not expect to remain at that place and then sort of develop your understanding of the Dharma and as you go on through time and remain that same person. The idea is that you want to evolve. And as we evolve, you kind of leave behind who you were. And you hopefully become somebody very different than what you were when you started with the Dharma. It has the ability to be radically transformative. And transformative in the sense that you almost can't recognize yourself at some time in the future. That the possibility of change, positive change, spiritual development, that's what you're looking for. And as that occurs, your understanding sort of, comes along with that process. And things sort of become clearer to you. That's kind of one way of looking at it as an answer. Another thing that I think is an important point is, and this is a little bit more, I don't know, it's just kind of me personally, but I believe that psychology is a big part of Buddhism. Buddhism has its own psychology. I'm not talking about anything about Western psychology or counseling or any of that kind of stuff. But there is an element to our psyche in which we are somewhat fragile, somewhat vulnerable, left to our own devices. If we try, if you try too hard in the beginning, you can stumble, and you can you can have problems. You can develop psychological problems, which are you can explain it any number of different ways. But what I'm saying is that you're dealing with your psyche, you're dealing with something very complex, and you ought to treat it with a certain kind of respect and caution, and be measured in and humble. Humility goes a long way in Dharma, I think. And so that's also important, because so this is what I'm getting at, is that the way the Dharma really succeeds is the more private it becomes. And when it becomes private, it becomes something that really is not social. It doesn't have really a social role to it at all. I mean, you may be social, you may interact with other people, but your own understanding of the Dharma becomes a very private affair. And so in order to really navigate that process, you have to be comfortable, with your own, in a solitary way. And that kind of solitude, that's a kind of a place where you ought to be, what is it, emotionally sort of strong in order to be comfortable there, and not, go to some, weird place where you're not entirely healthy, you might say, right? I say that jokingly, but I'm serious. So I don't know. This, that's sort of tangential to where this discussion started, but I think it's relevant. And so, to me, I've been delving in Buddhism for a long time, and I found it, absolutely no regrets, never a sense of second thoughts, never a sense of like that I plumbed the depths, or that I don't really. There's nothing more for me to learn. I'm nowhere, even in the vicinity of that, and but I really believe that if you can approach Buddhism in a sort of what should I say, not casual, but in a way where you're intrigued by it, or you're interested by it, or you find it stimulating, you find it intellectually, it satisfies a certain impulse of curiosity. But it's far more than intellectual. It's way beyond intellect. It's much more, all-encompassing of your being. I mean, I sometimes I say, like, again, I'm as Western as any of you are, but I observe sort of. I can also sort of, become more, I don't know, an observer of kind of people who are also Western, and my sense of it is that we Westerners tend to be very rational. I don't know whether it's because of our education or our culture or whatever it is. And to me, like, this is not a scientific thing, but I use this sort of as an example that our rational being is like maybe in this part of our head, but there's all of this that's below, where our emotions are, where the things that really motivate us and drive us lies below that, and is much more powerful, can be much more powerful, and it is in fact much more powerful than our intellect. We use our intellect to tap into it, hopefully in a positive way. But if you want to, if you have any expectation of being able to sort of, reach that level of your own, being, you can't do it just by reading, as many English translations of Buddhist books as you get your hands on. It won't do the job. You have to. There has to be something that sort of allows you to become more able to sort of inhabit your psyche and sort of be able to walk around in that realm, which is very private, very mental, and be able to do things in that area which are positive, which are beneficial, not things that can be damaging. And that's possible. Also, if you don't don't go about it in the right way, whatever that might be. All right, so I'm sorry, we really kind of went around. Yeah, sure.
Could I just make a brief response? First of all, thank you so much for reminding myself and about your teaching, that your experience that Buddhism has really helped others to transform themselves.
Yeah.
I've heard you say that before, and it's really stayed with me. However, I think personally that Rich's question, and I could be wrong, comes from a different perspective, which maybe I share myself, which is if you're, I think it's, and Rich, tell me if I'm wrong. Um, if you have experienced in your life very high expectations and possibly unrealistic one, as a teacher, I have certainly seen this in students.
Right.
And sometimes we discredit ourselves, don't give ourselves full credit, or even say, you know, it was through my karma that I earned this profession or this family or whatever good has come to you. We don't always give ourselves full credit. Maybe sometimes with me, it's I'm confused between boasting and actually just saying or acknowledging that I've achieved X, Y, Z. I don't, and I don't know. Do you mind if I ask Richard if that's related to what he was questioning from?
It's very interesting. It wasn't specifically what I was curious about, but I think it's a very important question. This idea, are you talking about self-appreciation and losing perhaps motivation, or are you talking about something else?
I think it's related to that, not acknowledging one's accomplishments, and if you do that, if you aren't fair to yourself in that respect, then I imagine one could depreciate, as you mentioned.
Right. I mean, certainly, I'm not suggesting, you know, that we should belittle ourselves. You know, I'm not suggesting that whatsoever. But there's, you know, that's also, you know, if you want to address that from the point of view of the Dharma, for instance, you know, take the, you know, Langtamba's verse, right? The second verse of the 8 verses says you have to place yourself below everyone. Like everyone is, you know, better than you, higher than you, more important than you. So now that's not necessarily in conflict with what you're saying, that you shouldn't belittle yourself. It's not saying that you should belittle, that you assume that sort of you know, place of humility. That humility is not equivalent with, you know, self-deprecation, right? So how do you, you know, to me, the idea of distinctions is really an important thing. Being able to make clear and valid distinctions, like you know, self-confidence versus pride, right? How do you distinguish those, right? Another example is, you know, I mean, we're really drifting, but maybe it's just worthwhile. One of the things in is the idea of confession, right? Which is a Mahayana practice. The idea of confession, there's the classic, you know, scriptural source, which is quoted in Shantideva, in his Shiksha Samudaya, is this Sutra of the 4 Dharmas. And that Sutra of the 4 Dharmas identifies 4 so-called powers, or so-called strengths that you need to, you know, rely on or avail yourself of as the means of purifying yourself, or the means of clearing away the negative impact that your bad karma, you know, the idea that it sort of holds you back from spiritual development. That's a necessary part of Mahayana practice. Okay, so one of those 4 so-called powers is called. It's an interesting word. It's in Tibetan it's called Nabasun Jimbeto, and the meaning, the description of it is to have a very deep sense of regret for your past misdeeds. Right? That you have to think of yourself as being someone who committed wrongful things in the past. So, you know, we all, I mean, speaking of psychology, we all know that, you know, guilt is something that a lot of psychologists think is something that we need to be careful about, and, you know, can be harmful to us, and we shouldn't carry around a lot of guilt. We should sort of be guilt-free. Well, here's a sense in Buddhist practice where we are supposed to, you know, evoke a sense of guilt, but not in a way that is, deleterious. So again, it's how do you do that in a way that doesn't sort of make you feel like you're the scum of the earth or something. It's not saying that, right? So I'm giving you examples. And the example that I'm giving you is I'm saying that it's almost like, you can take any sort of proposition which has some value, and then you can distort it and have it become something that is, improper. Or vice versa. You can take something that you think, like, well, I shouldn't depreciate myself. I shouldn't belittle myself. And so therefore, you walk around with a strong sense of self-confidence, but what you're calling self-confidence may in fact, bleed into something that's not just self-confidence. Right? So that, I don't know if I'm making the point clear, but that idea.
I can just briefly express, but I just think the issue here is what's the appropriate teaching. For instance, you're referring to whenever I associate with others, I will learn to think of myself as the lowest one of all.
Right.
And you have to be, in the mood to take that the proper way as you're discussing. And some of us might fall into,
I'm
rat in the corner,
right.
And that's not what is meant by
not at all. Anything but. So, that applies. I mean, in a way, we've gone into a bunch of different areas, but it does come back to the original theme that we were talking about, which was this: how do you find a balance between the teaching of suffering, right, and not having that make you, some sort of person who thinks that life is, horrible and why am I even living?
So it's a matter of timing when you can really apply yourself to the 8 types of suffering. It's to be a constructive response.
Well, yeah, I guess, yes, I suppose. I mean, there are times when, there's another sort of situation which kind of gives a little bit of I think, a clue to how to, conduct yourself, and that is when you're meditating, right? One point in meditation. So this is just an example. This doesn't apply to everyday life because this is talking about when you're sitting down in a very sort of structured way and you're trying to develop one-point concentration. So for practicing one-point meditation, there's kind of 2 extremes that you need to avoid. One is having your mind become dull and you lose clarity. And the other extreme is that your mind becomes sort of too excited and becomes distracted. And so when the topic is being described, it's saying that, well, if you find yourself going in this direction, right, this is find your mind being dull or losing your clarity, then if you can't continue meditating, you actually have to sort of stop meditating. Then you have to do some other kind of technique to sort of lift your spirits and sort of give yourself some more, energy or enthusiasm and willingness, mental, efforts. So there are certain things that you can do, and with various examples of. You can practice recollection of the 3 jewels, for instance. This is an inspiring, uplifting thing. On the other hand, if you find that your mind is sort of flying all over the place, and you're not able to sort of keep hold of it and keep it focused properly on the object, then you have to do something to sort of counteract that. And then you have some ideas of, thinking of things that should sort of give you pause, like thinking about, the suffering nature of samsara, sobering kind of thoughts that will sort of allow you to sort of bring your mind sort of back under control. So it's the idea that there are different sort of measures that you need to be aware of and need to know when to apply them under what sort of circumstances. So, I think that also has some bearing on something that's raised here. So, if you're meditating on suffering and you find yourself being just overwhelmed by it, and just even becoming what you would call depressed. Well, maybe you shouldn't keep doing that. Maybe you should do something else that will, sort of give you a little bit more, sense of enthusiasm.
So that you can meditate on suffering with joyful effort.
Well, yes, but I mean, joy is joyful effort. That's kind of a loaded word. It doesn't necessarily mean, jubilation. It means enthusiasm.
Yeah. And also the second line, the second stanza of line of Dr. Art says, with a perfect intention.
Yeah.
May I subdue myself as well. So it's uplifting in a way, thinking there are these beings around me that are, and,
Right.
So there is this way of sort of.
Yeah. Well, and so as I think as a beginning practitioner, it is the hardest time to practice Dhamma. Is when you are sort of your knowledge is somewhat limited. You're less able really to help yourself when you need to in terms of your spiritual thoughts. You become, as you get more and more what should I say? If you develop some better understanding, that refinement makes things get easier. I think that's true, and so I guess what I'm saying. Part of what I'm saying is you don't have to have the answers. I mean, that's its own sort of instruction, is to kind of acknowledge your limitations and be comfortable with it, and anticipate the possibility of learning more and getting better at it or something like that. I mean, I don't think you necessarily want to stay in that place forever, but if it's giving you some kind of conflict, that's one way to sort of come to terms, I guess, with difficulties. That's a kind of patience in itself.
Let's just see one more thing.
Sure.
The challenge of this particular, experience is that you may present a wonderful teaching, but you've got 8 or 9 different people
Sure.
in different states of mind, and it may be appropriate for some, and maybe not the thing for others. I mean, that's the challenge of working in a group. Right?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. I mean, well, maybe we've digressed enough. I mean, it's also, I think, there is a cultural difference. Like my observation, like Tibetans, for a few Tibetans that I do know, and Asians, for instance, or people who are born in a Buddhist culture, a lot of them, they sort of, when they go to a teaching, they go into it with an attitude that it's like way over their heads, but nevertheless, it's worthwhile for them to be there. And they'll sort of, if they pick up even a little bit, I mean, they might even think like it's just a blessing to just be sitting in the room almost, and because they have this kind of a perspective. They don't necessarily think of themselves as someone who's going to develop very profound understanding about Buddhism. Oh, Buddhism is very deep. It's beyond me, but still, I'm a Buddhist, so I. When I can, I go to a teaching, and I don't expect to learn very much, but it's worth it. You take the Westerners, they're kind of the opposite. When they go to these teachings, they want to know every bloody detail about whatever's coming out of the teacher's mouth, and they want to know it, maybe even better than the teacher, kind of. I'm exaggerating, but it's a different point of view. If you expect more, and you kind of, there's a little, almost even a frustration when it doesn't, you don't get this kind of epiphany all the time from it. That's another kind of dimension. In the large picture, that's just an observation. It really doesn't have a lot of value to it, but, take it for what it's worth. Okay, so anyway, there's, well, sorry, let's try to come back to Ray David's chapter. One of the things that again, that for me is that I find myself, wanting to get to the point where I can claim, where I can feel as though I'm ready to sort of develop a better kind of Mahayana, practice. And so that means especially bodhicitta and right view. And what I've mentioned this a couple of times, and what I'm struck with is the fact that this very kind of subject, which is, to put it into the category of the Four Noble Truths, for instance, truth of suffering in particular, that this is something that is kind of essential. Okay? And so in the Lamrim, and in particular, like in the Lojong, for instance, you take the Lojong teaching. The Lojong one, like the preliminary to the Lojong, they'll say, what is it? Would be taking refuge, impermanence, karma, and oh no, it's not even taking refuge. It's like a favorable rebirth, impermanence, karma, and then the disadvantages of samsara, and that's it. So the disadvantages of samsara, typically in the Lojong, most of the Lojong texts, they'll discuss kind of the category of 6 kinds of suffering. The fact that samsara is fluctuates. It's not something that it's changeable, and that has many different interpretations to it. On all those 6 points, that we should think about, we'll constantly be reborn, and that should be something that is, kind of makes us sort of feel weary, the weariness of samsara, of thinking about the fact that I've taken literally an infinite number of rebirths. I had to take birth literally an infinite number of times. I've had to die, give up my body an infinite number of times. I mean, that evokes a certain sense of, that feeling of, that it's kind of weighs on you. If you think about it, that's appropriate to sort of become dissatisfied with samsaric existence. But I don't think, unless you have a really penetrating intellect, or I don't know that really goes far enough to develop the degree of dissatisfaction with all of samsaric existence that is necessary, sort of, to develop renunciation, so-called renunciation, which is to say you think of samsara top to bottom, no matter how pleasurable samsara, some parts of it might be, that doesn't interest you in the slightest, and you see it for what it is, and you reject it, and you want to not be caught up and chained to it. So that's a pretty deep-seated kind of perspective, which again goes back to the very thing that Richard's talking about. And so the question becomes, do you want to go there? Do you want to go to the point where you are that radical in your attitude towards all samsara? And is it healthy to do it if you don't approach it in a kind of what do I say now, in correct way? Are you going to end up going off the deep end because of it? That's I think a serious and proper issue, and that's why I say that it's something that you need to be careful about, and kind of do it with your eyes open if you really have the the interest and the courage to sort of go at that kind of a mindset in a strong way. Uh, I would propose that it is liberating if you um, if you are able to approach it correctly. I'll give you so, I mean, I think most everybody here has had tantric initiations, right? We have maybe some people watching this. I'm not going to say anything too esoteric, but there is this idea, in Tantra, which is that the sense of your ordinariness, right, is something that you have to abandon. And the idea, and so there are techniques for doing that, right? And that, typically that is some kind of deity yoga practice. But what that kind of implies is that you are in fact jettisoning everything about the way you, quote, used to think. And you are trying to take yourself to a, quote, new place and stay there. And, everything that the way you used to live your life, all the things you remember from your childhood and all that, it's, not of any further value whatsoever. In fact, to the extent that you, tend to go back there, because we do it is, something that our minds kind of gravitate toward, it's the obstacle you're trying to prevent. So, that's an analogy which I think you can raise to this idea of complacency with your samsaric existence versus the sense of great alarm and even terror about not being able to sort of free yourself from this fundamentally unsatisfactory existence. So, if you sort of go in that direction, it's entirely appropriate to think of your previous ways of kind of enjoying, looking at sort of avenues of enjoyment. That sort of becomes not an end, right? Not something that you should be concerned about, not something that you should give much attention to. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't relax, or you shouldn't be in a contented state of mind, sort of, right? So this is all kind of a piece in a way, and I think that's kind of the conflict, is that the Dharma is telling us to go away from our ordinary secular mindset to the extent that we can, and substitute something new. I mean, in a way, that Four Noble Truths, that's what it is. The notion of impermanence and suffering and selflessness is a way of thinking that is alien to the average everyday person's way of looking at the world. And the vocabulary of the Abhidharma, of the five skandhas, sort of gives you the conceptual framework in which to construct a view that is in harmony with the idea of seeking liberation in the case of Jnana path, and being a foundation for bodhicitta and right view in the case of the mind. So you one thing you can say is it's a little bit of how should I put it? To the extent that we skip that step, to skip the step of developing some kind of renunciation, We try to go from the way we are, our ordinary way of thinking, and try to, enter into the world of Mahayana. It's at the very best, you're going to be quite limited in how far you can take it, I think, personally. So, for what it's worth, I think maybe we'll let the discussion end at that point. There's a really, really beautiful section at the end of these 25 verses, in which Chandra sort of introduces the idea of why the Bodhisattva has to reflect on suffering. And there's a lot of quotations. He quotes from other verses in Ayadeva's text. He quotes from Nagarjuna. He quotes from some Mahayana sutras. And I'd like to read that when we do the verses. So anyway, I thought today, since we haven't really done it, and I think maybe it's appropriate because what this chapter really doesn't do is it doesn't really approach, at least overtly or explicitly, the doctrine of the three types of suffering, Ayadeva's type. And yet, in my estimation, that formulation of the three kinds of suffering is really the most, to me, most effective way of developing a sense of the unsatisfactoriness of samsara, an understanding of it, and having gained that understanding, to bring about this sense of that's really the purpose of it, is to sort of replace your attachment to samsaric existence with a sense of dread of samsaric existence, which by its very nature sort of pulls you away from that kind of attachment. And that's really the essence of what meditating on suffering is all about.
Do you prefer questions at the end?
No, we can. Today's kind of we can keep going for a while.
Okay, because when I've certainly heard this explanation before, the sense of dread and samsara. And I also try to wrap my mind about it with the bodhisattvas who love samsara because of what it can.
Well, they don't love samsara, but they. I mean, anyway, go ahead. I would quibble with the word love, but.
Well, okay, respect it because it's the place that they want to come back to develop their practice. Or is this am I kind of misquoting it?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, that's like on one of the there's in the very beginning of the Lamrim Chenmo. I don't want to again digress and go there, but there's a really, really beautiful section where Tsongkhapa talks about how the Bodhisattva, by the nature of his attitude, his or her attitude, can abide in samsara and do so in a way where one is not affected by it. One does not experience suffering. That things that for a typical person would be suffering, kind of the Bodhisattva, and this is a really almost a mystical thing. He says the Bodhisattva is able to, in a way, kind of transcend some sort of suffering. That's a kind of different subject. No, it's not emptiness. It's not emptiness. It comes largely more, I think, from compassion. Anyway, were you going to make a point?
I was in my own mind, but I'm not articulating very well. But
Okay.
Just talking on this is helpful.
Okay. I urge you to. I don't have it with me, the English translation of the area on bodhicitta, but it's a really extraordinary passage. And Tsongkhapa says, he uses the word. This is sort of the marvelous quality of the Bodhisattva. That the Bodhisattva willingly accepts continuing to abide in samsara, and almost by the nature of the commitment to others that's really motivating one to do that, that in a way that has a sort of, I don't know, I think this is not exactly the way it's worded, but I think the idea is there, that sort of almost exempts you from ordinary tribulations that other people have to endure. And they are able to do, there's a certain joy, there's a certain, I mean, that goes back to maybe that's what Richard was looking for. There's just, I don't want to do this sort of new agey kind of things, but there's almost a kind of, not tantric sense of bliss, but there's a sense of that the nature of the Bodhisattva's enterprise is itself a kind of unique. It permeates your experience.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, no, there is this idea almost. It even says it in these kind of things. It's almost like, I don't know that it uses the word, but it's almost like you put your hand in fire and it doesn't burn. That kind of, to that extent. So, I don't know that particular phraseology is there, but the idea of it, that the Bodhisattva is sort of takes on, it's almost like, we would describe it as this, to kind of, you use the image of quicksilver, that bodhicitta transforms your virtue. What would an ordinary kind of virtue, it transforms it into a unique virtue that promotes enlightenment, both Buddhahood, of supreme enlightenment, rather than the way an ordinary virtue, will bring some sort of favorable samsaric experience. Yeah. All right. I think we're kind of out there, so let's go back to this. So I wanted to read this, and this is a section on the 3 kinds of suffering from the Lama Chum, right? And there was a handout from the Yogacara Bhumi. Did you bring copies?
Yeah, there's copies.
You don't have one, but it's probably here. So, so this is Tsongkhapa's.
What page are you on?
In Tibetan, this is 226. In English, this is volume. Is it? Yeah. Volume 1.
289.
Yeah. Yeah, it's at the very beginning of, on the right hand side. Further meditation on suffering. Here, anybody want to do the bottom? So, he starts out by Tsongkhapa starts out by making reference to this passage, which he doesn't really quote, but is obviously taken from this. And this is from the Yogacara Bhumi, one of the early sections of it. The Yogacara Bhumi is made up of 17 parts or sections, and sort of the earlier ones are kind of they're kind of not necessarily Mahayanistic in its, but it is kind of the nuts and bolts of the. A lot of it's very familiar from the Abhidharma Kosha. It's a formulation of the subject matter that relates to Abhidharma. So this is in the 3rd section. And so it is a very short passage. So, but it's paraphrased by Tsongkhapa. It says, for example, he says, "Polmi gamje," and those 2 words in Tibetan, he uses the word. Let's see, polmi, right? In the translation of the Yogacara, do you have it? Do you have that?
Yes.
Right. So on line 2, it says. Berna polmik. You see that? Okay. So polmik is given first in Tsongkhapa, and that's a Tibetan translation. It's not a common, word. It refers to a boil or something like that. And then, so Tsongkhapa uses the word je, which maybe is a more familiar Tibetan term. He's putting it here as a synonym. That's not in the Tibetan translation of the Yoga. So you can see from that right away that he's taking this passage and talking about it. So he says, Shintu Tawa means that Shintu Tawa literally means very hot, but it means something painful. It's a painful boil, right? Then, so the image of the boil is the metaphor for conditioned existence, something of conditioned existence. In other words, life is like a boil, and that we have this boil, and we endure the natural pain of the boil constantly. That's sort of like a, what do they call it? Kind of background, in the background of our existence is the unpleasantness of the suffering of conditioned existence. We just don't recognize it as being unpleasant. So he says, so a very painful boil, this is saying that in and of itself, conditioned existence is very painful. The average person doesn't see it as such. Then he says, choose silhouette. Tabna means if you pour cool water onto a painful boil, there's a certain palliative quality to that. It seems refreshing, and that's the coolness is a relief, right? So he says that relief has the appearance of being pleasurable, right? And we would say, oh, that feels good, right? So that is the metaphor, the pouring of the cool water on the painful boil of samsaric existence represents our pleasant experiences. It says that is koroapanam gichora delate, right? That represents or is a metaphor for the pleasurable experiences, the pleasurable feelings, right? It's the second skandha feeling for samsaric being. Right? And it says dini, and then he says, now this is and then so in this handout, it's a little more straightforward. So he says, it starts out. I'm going to the handout now. That's right. It says, how then should the embodied person, the embodied form of all beings that occupies the three realms be viewed? And the word for that I'm translating as embodied being, I did that because in Tibetan it says lu, right? You see that? It says kam sumna choga simjan namgi lu. And actually in the Sanskrit it says how should that lu, and actually the Sanskrit word means ashraya. Ashraya means in Tibetan usually that's translated as sten. It's like this basis or the substratum. However, in this case, that substratum means our five skandhas, which is the sum total of our being. So I translated it as our embodied form, because if you take it as root, you might just think just our physical being, but it's more comprehensive. But ashraya, I believe, is meant to be understood in terms of our entire being, all of our five skandhas. So how should the overall being of sentient beings who are active in the three realms, right? So that's saying all of samsara, the desire realm, the form realm, the formless realm, right? And not just human beings. This is all of samsara beings. How is their very existence, how is it to be viewed? So opening statement says, and then in the Tibetan, for some reason, it doesn't say how is it to be viewed, right? It doesn't start jita da. It doesn't say it. It says you should view it. It ends this way. So in the Sanskrit, it says how should it be viewed? And it says, for example, or it should be viewed like a burning boil or a very painful boil, right? And here, this is a word I hope you remember. He says, because it is affected by, or it is subject to indisposition. Remember that term that we had discussed before. So it says that indisposition is the very essence of the suffering of conditioned existence. All the implications of what that term means. And so the word is dashtulia in Sanskrit. Right? In Tibetan, it's mengenyen. Right? So he says that's it. All samsaric existence should be viewed as like a painful boil because it is permeated by some kind of indisposition, some kind of well, some kind of well, I would say unsatisfactoriness or some kind of flawed quality to it. And then he says, because that's the first question. Then the next question is the same object, right? How should we regard those pleasurable feelings that occur for our embodied existence or for our very samsaric being? How should they be viewed? And then he says they should be viewed in the same way as the sensation of cooling water, it doesn't say water, but something cool being applied to a painful boil. Right? And so that's what Tsongkhapa is talking about here, right? So what we call painful feelings are, I mean, you can read a lot into it. I mean, the notion is that, that the relief that you get when you, try to, put cold water on a boil or something, it feels good, but only for a little while, because eventually the nature of the boil, which doesn't go away by putting cold water on, is going to return. So it's short-lived comfort that you get. So it starts like this. And so he says that transitoriness of pleasant sensations is the essence of the suffering of change. So when we chase that, we're chasing something that is not long lasting, right? In comparison to kind of that overall underlying sort of foundation of unsatisfactoriness that we're subject to, and that even though we have these temporary pleasant experiences that we may encounter, whether accidental or whether we seek them and are able to experience them, those are few and far between, and they don't last very long. And because of that, kind of the idea of chasing them is a self-deluding effort, because they don't last, and the very fact that you're chasing them, you're setting yourself up for disappointment when they disappear, and then that just makes you want to go back for them again, rather than sort of developing some kind of ability to tolerate what's essentially unpleasant. Right? Something along those lines, right? So he says, Dini nam shikpana means when this pleasant experience ends, shikpana means when it comes to an end. Dungel kieve, right? That in itself, kind of the taking away of something pleasant, right? Like a kid that has a toy and you take it away from them and they cry, right? That generates, that in itself, the separation from something pleasant that you enjoyed and you childishly sort of cling to, and when you lose it, that will in and of itself engender some kind of unpleasantness. Therefore, that's why it's called the suffering of change. And the suffering of change means the fact that it goes away, and when it goes away, you don't like it, and that is you're making yourself more unpleasant by kind of programming yourself to seek those kinds of transitory pleasures, and then when they are gone, you're setting yourself up to be unhappy. And then he says, This is important because this is part of the whole doctrine of the three kinds of suffering. Dayan, now this is Tsongkhapa. He doesn't. This is not in the Yoga Tabun. Dayan means furthermore regarding this point, the suffering of change. It doesn't only relate to the feeling. So it's not just pleasant feelings that represent the suffering of change. All the other mental qualities that accompany that pleasant feeling, whether they are other mental factors or whether they are, if it's eye consciousness, or, ear consciousness, mind consciousness, all of those other mental qualities, those other mental events that accompany the feeling are also covered by that same quality of the suffering of change. So they are also part of the suffering of change, even though they're not themselves per se feelings. And not only is it relate to, so that's subjective, right, our mental states. Also, whatever external object, if we're talking about sense objects, for instance, what is the thing that you took hold of, that thing which you directed your attention to and which generated that pleasant feeling, that too becomes part of the overall, essence of the suffering of change. So any contaminated, for the word samsaric object, some samsaric mental object, those are also part of the suffering. So it means all the elements of your five skandhas, which are largely subjective, but then even the part of the external world that relates to that experiential state, that also is incorporated and encompassed by the meaning of the term suffering change. Right? Oh yeah. Then so that covers the first part, right? And then the next one is ludela, means again. So for your existence, how should we regard those painful feelings that occur for our existence? And it says, they are like putting some sort of caustic substance, like salt, onto the boil. That aggravates the natural unpleasantness of the boil. Like, it heightens it. It makes it more painful. Right? So whatever the unpleasantness of the suffering condition existence might be, then painful sensations they just amplify that. They don't last forever. They during the time that they do, it's like making some sort of existence more intense. Right? So that's the second one. So and then Tsongkhapa says, Tsaju means salty water. Gyurche means something that's caustic. So that kind of feeling, that kind of sensation, like applying something caustic to the boil. Tervana means that makes the boil sort of flame up and become that much stronger. It becomes very painful, even more painful than it is usually. And that's how you should view painful feeling. And then he says, Nam Kyevatsamni means from the moment that it arises. This is talking about, I'm going back and forth. It says, Nam Kyevatsamni Lusam Sem Dorja. It's the very nature of painful sensations is that as they arise, they are unpleasant. They are taxing as it doesn't even cover. They are, upsetting and in a strong way. That's how painful feelings should be regarded. It says, like, and then this is, I don't think this is in here. It says, and he says, like this is a kelma, means kidney. And so, like, if you have a kidney stone, I've never had them, but that's very, very intense pain. Kelme subset means like the sharp pain of the kidneys, typically like kidney stone. It's like that. So painful sensations are like that, very intense. And then it says, again, this is Tsongkhapa, it doesn't refer only to the painful feeling, as before, it's all the other mental factors that accompany that painful feeling, and what? I mean, if you think of it, and the sense of ego that's present there, that makes it even worse, because the sense of you being someone who is being subjected to pain, that also becomes hard to endure. That gets aggravated as well. Yeah. Then so that's the second one, and then we go to the third one, which is what about the feelings that are neither painful nor pleasurable, right? The neutral feelings, you say. Rekpa de nigadan machebe tuki trebutavuni. He says, the third situation, which is mentioned in the Ochar Bhumi, says, when you experience Dumel Yang Mayin, Dewa Yang Mayin Betora Joam, how should you regard those feelings which are neither pleasurable nor painful? Right? And then he says, Perna Permi Kunetawa Deni La Siwadan Men Mayimba. Okay, so it means those situations where you don't do anything to assuage the pain, nor do you experience anything that aggravates the discomfort of the boil. Rangshingi kunitsawa. Rangshingi means by its very nature, it is unpleasant, the unpleasantness of the boil. Right? That is this metaphor for the suffering of conditioned existence. Now, one of the things that indicates is to say that while we don't generally, when we think of the feelings, the feelings that are neither painful nor pleasurable, those so-called neutral feelings, the term for that is equanimity, right? But there's a word. There are three kinds of equanimity, right? Right? You know those? This is like a, you do?
To others,
Right.
treat enemies as friends.
Right. There's equanimity there's impartiality, one of the four measurables, right? That's a,
Meditation as between meditations.
sorry?
In meditation as equanimous to between meditations.
Between meditations?
Between sessions?
Between sessions.
The state of being
Meditative
between sessions
session.
like being in meditation.
Treat them
Oh.
I think that's the fourth.
Okay, it's the fourth one. So in the Abdharma, there's the mental factors includes equanimity as one of the virtues, one of the 11 virtuous factors, and that is only it's only something that's developed during meditation, and it's called equanimity in the sense that, I'll give you an example. For instance, a lot of times when people talk about mindfulness meditation, and I'm not an expert on the techniques of mindfulness meditation, so I could be off on this, but the way I understand it is that as you become somewhat introspective and you're engaging in a mindfulness practice, that you are observing your feelings, right? Like what the feelings are throughout your body, for instance, or what kind of thoughts you're having, and that as you tend to observe them, then there's a certain kind of calmness that develops. That is sort of the positive effect of being introspective and sort of going to a kind of calm place. And that is, to a certain degree, this virtue of equanimity. So it refers to. It's a- um, uh, yeah, it's an evenness of mind. It's a phrase, and there's a yeah. So this is so like when you're trying to develop one point of concentration, right? There is the fact that the mind can tend to go towards a dullness, or it can tend to be distracted. So that's something that you're trying to kind of you know avoid and try to keep from happening. And so to the extent that you are able to do so, the mind becomes that much more focused. So that the absence of uh, Jiwa and Groba, right, that represents equanimity. And so there is this very important, this is a very important mental factor, because when they talk about meditation, for instance, you get to the level of where you're approaching shamatha, right? They're in the there are various sources, but one of them is the Madhyanta Vibhaga. Madhyanta Vibhaga has this doctrine of 5 uh, faults and 8 factors that are the antidotes for it. Right? And so the latter 2 are failing to make the appropriate to apply the appropriate remedy when you're developing languor, or what I call languor, or dullness and scattering. That's a fault. Right? So you have to apply some kind of effort to counteract them. And then when the mind sort of takes on a kind of natural, state of equanimity, then you don't need to apply any effort. And then if you're trying to do something like when you don't need to, then that becomes a flaw. And so at that point, you're meant to relax and just let the mind sort of remain in this calm state. That quality of calmness that is developed as you refine your concentration, that is the essence of this equanimity. So that's a not an everyday kind of equanimity. It only applies to meditation. Anyway.
A mind version of maybe of the Mount Satipatthana?
It's a German Yeah, it's a German for. Well, I don't know that sutra off the top of my head, but I think it's comparable to the subject of for Satipatthana is Pali for Smriti Upastha. Brahmanyashapa. Brahmanyashapa, there's 4 main kinds. And
Yeah.
so anyway, so where were we? Oh, we're talking about equanimity, right? So there are different kinds of equanimity. So there's the Sarwa equanimity. The equanimity of feeling is that which is neither painful nor pleasant. That's one kind of equanimity. Yeah, it's kind of a neutral feeling. Feeling that you're sort of indifferent. And then there's the equanimity of impartiality, not saying favoritism. And then there's this one. Right? Anyway, that was a digression. So normally, normally for us, we think of that equanimity of feeling, right, as neither painful, as neither unpleasant, nor pleasant. Typically, something that you, not necessarily, but it's a state in which you might become bored, right? Because it's not particularly enjoyable or unpleasant. What this is saying is that state of equanimity from at a what could I say, in a more aware sense, not from the fact that it is neither painful nor pleasant, but from the fact that in an overall sense, we are subject to impermanence. We, moment to moment, over which we have no control. It's a process of cause and effect. One moment of consciousness will produce another moment of consciousness. That moment of consciousness will lead to a further moment of consciousness, and there's no sort of there's no recourse. It's going to happen. Our bodies are, also subject to a similar kind of, transitoriness. So that's one thing. So the idea is that we have no control over that, and that sense of lack of control is something that should properly be unsettling. It's like life is happening whether we like it or not. Okay? And then if we add to that the understanding that we are the creators of our own future, samsaric ongoing existence. So we are enduring, we are experiencing our current samsaric status passively without any ability to do anything about it, to affect it, or stop it. And at the same time, we are engaging in all kinds of error. So we are misunderstanding what is impermanent as not being impermanent. We are misunderstanding what is unsatisfactory as being satisfactory. Because of that, mistaken understanding, then we react in all sorts of inappropriate ways that create karma, new karma. And even if we have an understanding that we're doing that, it's very hard for us to prevent that from going on, unless and until we are able to have even a conceptual understanding of selflessness. We are cooked. We are always going to be reacting ego with a sense of ego in a variety of ways. Either we're going to feel threatened, or we're going to feel, drawn to something to satisfy the ego. And that by, being subject to that, we are not only enduring something, but we're perpetuating. All right. And so if we recognize that with any kind of clarity, it should upset us. Okay. And so understanding that condition, that samsara is, we are subject to it, and we are also, creating the conditions to perpetuate it indefinitely in our present state of mind, should give us pause at the very least, and it should make us think, we are creating our own suffering. And being in that state is, it's like if you realize that for what it is, then that should make you unhappy. That should trouble you. And that's when you begin to get a glimpse of the suffering and condition of existence. And that's going on, that's there. That's kind of the baseline of our existence. And if we understand that, then we see the baseline of our existence as not pleasant, in this different sort of way of being unpleasant. Right. Right. So, the idea of wanting to find some sort of, pleasant sort of oasis in our lives, that's a kind of a false proposition that you create for yourself. It's false to think that way, because it's not possible. And, so it's kind of a more enlightened way to do it is just to recognize life for what it is, and then not fold your tent and cry, but, kind of gird your loins and decide to do something about it, right? And in a way, there is some kind of, I believe there is some kind of peace, there is some kind of satisfaction, there is some kind of purpose that you derive from that place, which is anything but depressing. It gives you real purpose. It's not just, oh, this is what matters, nothing else does. And then you focus on that and you kind of forget about everything else. And that's to me, that's kind of the essence of, a Dharma practice where you are going to some sort of what you would call a permanent kind of well-being, state of well-being. Anyway, that is something that sort of should come out of this presentation. But let's read the rest of it because he has some more things to say. So that's all. Let's see. Yeah, so that's all that the Yogacara passage is about. Just giving that symbol or metaphor of the boil, and then the three states of in relation to it. But Tsongkhapa goes on and has some more things to say about it. It says, so here, in particular, about the suffering of conditioned existence. Richard asked me about this before. This is the passage that you were asking about. Actually, there's more from another source that maybe we'll address another time. But this is sort of a kind of very terse way of describing this particular form of suffering. So he says, you got the English? So where does it say? It should say something about so right. This is saying the condition of the boil in which you are not experiencing either of those two kinds of sensations. Mm-hmm. Right. So he says that is sakwa danchebe sorwa tangyo. Now that's a key phrase. So it's saying that is neutral, so-called neutral feeling. But he says sakwa dancheva means it's I don't know if it say contaminated or what does it say?
It's because these feelings coexist with dysfunctional tendencies.
Oh, yeah. That's a very coexist with dysfunctional tendencies.
They constitute the stuff of the conditionality.
Okay, so that phrase there, they coexist with dysfunctional tendencies. That's an attempt to give some meaning to this word sahasrava in Sanskrit, right? And then asrava is a synonym for the mental afflictions. Asrava literally means the outflows. It's an ancient term. I was intrigued by the fact that in Jain religion, they talk about the asravas as something that flows into you, and they use that term in relation to karma, to accumulating karma. In Buddhism, they think of it the other way. They think of it as something flowing outward, and they associate it with the mental afflictions, that the mental afflictions are sort of directed towards mental objects in an inappropriate way, and then kind of force you that in the way that the mental afflictions, overpower you. You don't have any control over them, and they're causing you to engage in some sort of behavior that will result in producing, contaminated karma, right?
Oh, excuse me, the stickiness.
Yeah, something like that. So the word is asara literally means something that flows out. I don't know that it comes. It's like in English we're effluent, right? Whether we think of that as sort of like, what are the discharge pipes from sewers, but it's something like that, right? And so this outward flowing tendency of the mental afflictions, right, is fundamental in the cause of samsaric existence, right? To the degree that the mental afflictions are the ultimate cause of samsaric existence. So it says, related to the mental afflictions is sa asara, or associated with the mental afflictions. The prefix sa means connected with, or associated with, or related to. So that's saying our very existence, if you think of our physical body, for instance, our physical body is by its very nature related to the mental afflictions, in that the mental afflictions and past karma produce this physical body. So it's impure. So even if we become an arhat, right? If we become an arhat and we eliminate all the mental afflictions, we've achieved some level of nirvana, right? The the form of nirvana when we're still alive. Our physical body is still an impure element of our being, in the sense that it was produced by conditions in the past life prior to our attaining that nirvana. And so we have to jettison that before we attain the nirvana without remaining. Okay? So everything up to and before the attainment of that nirvana is subject to the mental afflictions, either in the sense that it's created by our past mental afflictions, or to the degree that we still have the seeds of the mental afflictions and we still react inappropriately to our circumstances and create new karma, then all of that stuff is also sa-asrava in a causal way. So the word sa-asrava refers to the five skandhas. The five skandhas are sa-asrava. Five skandhas are associated with the mental afflictions. What does that mean? It means that they are the result of past mental afflictions, and they also are the source from which new mental afflictions are generated, and you create new causes of future existence. So that word of being associated with the mental afflictions is tantamount to being samsara, either causally or in the sense of being a result. So here he's saying, Sarpadhanchebe means those feelings which are tainted, right? I mean tainted or samsaric in the sense that they are not feelings of equanimity in which we are free of all the mental afflictions. So we are experiencing that equanimity, that neutral experiential state, and typically what happens is we don't know how to overcome our ignorance. So what do we do in that state of neutrality? We typically, turn the wheel of ignorance more than any other mental affliction. So we're in a neutral state of mind, so we don't have anything sort of impacting on us and causing us to become angry, or necessarily causing us to become, attached, or attachment to become overt. But guess what? We still have ignorance. We still believe in a real ego. We still believe in, permanence, and we still believe in, real, satisfactory conditions. And so we tend to reinforce that in this state of equanimity. And in that sense, that state of equanimity is one that we don't know how to not manifest our ignorance, and so therefore that equanimity is therefore identified as related to the mental affliction. In this case, largely because we will continue to produce and sort of accept, acknowledge, and be comfortable with our misunderstanding.
So the couple of groups use the word dysfunctional tendency. That is the outflow. That is this or
I get
conditionality.
Okay, so here he says. Well, here he says, "Nengen lin jesu jelwe." He says, because he says those feelings, those neutral feelings are, he says, "Nengen lin jesu jelwe" means they are connected with, or they are associated with indisposition. Maybe that's what the dysfunctional thing. Yeah, that because what did he say? They're
Dysfunctional tendencies.
Yeah, I think that's dysfunctional is his word for what I call indisposition. It's the sense of sort of the idea that we don't have how did the Buddhas act? The Buddhas act with complete effortlessness and spontaneity. They have no drag. They have no resistance to their knowledge or to their, tendencies to act. We, on the other hand, are the opposite, right? We, even if we have a sense of our, that we are mistaken in our thinking, we don't have our minds cannot sort of, in a kind of, in a easy way. There's a resistance to our being able to figure out how to free ourselves of our misunderstanding. And that sort of resistance, that kind of drag, is associated with the seeds of the mental afflictions that just sort of hold us back. And that's what that indisposition is. So that's a dysfunctional tendency. This is that dysfunctional tendency, right? That is the suffering of conditioned resistance. So that's the idea that here we are, even if we have some conceptual understanding of our imperfection, it ain't going to be easy for us to dig ourselves out of this thing, because we have this kind of resistance to our developing clarity and wisdom and one-pointed concentration and all the other obstacles.
And then conditionality is just the conditioned existence.
That condition means all conditionality means things that are subject to causation.
Just causation. Yeah.
Because our five skandhas are essentially, impermanent and causally produced and producing. Right? Just as one moment is the result of something else, it then becomes the cause for another thing after. So,
This point makes me feel like it's such an enormous task, because the suffering of suffering and suffering of change is self-evident. Like you feel it, and so do you take measures.
Yeah.
But this state where nothing is like pricking you, so then you don't even know you're in a state of ignorance and you're perpetuating it.
Right.
So you have to like constantly be mindful that I'm perpetuating samsara.
Well, but I get what you're saying, but I think what the remedy for it is that if you are presented with the understanding of subtle impermanence, if you're presented with the idea that there is such a thing, that we do have this kind of drag or this resistance or this obstacle to our developing some kind of knowledge, even when we have the impulse to do so, that if we develop an appreciation of that appreciation represents the understanding of the suffering of conditioned existence. And the more refined it becomes, the more aware we are of why and how it's unsatisfactory. And so it's the Aryas who, more than anyone, recognize that for what it is. And then we non-Aryas, we have to do our best to try to, get some glimmer of what that really represents. So that's one of the reasons why I believe that this particular doctrine of the three types of suffering is, if you are able to kind of penetrate into it, it's kind of radical. It really, kind of wakes you up in a way that, not that the other instructions are not effective, but I think this one kind of goes to the heart of it. And for that reason, I'm drawn to it as being kind of something.
So even if we see and understand this impermanence and this subtle impermanence, we still don't understand it spontaneously. We don't see it. What does spontaneously mean? When you use that word.
Well, when I said spontaneously, I meant that
like you said, the Buddha's experience.
What I meant is that they have the ability to act effortlessly. Well, not only that, I mean, that's even way up there. Yeah. But I'm saying, like, for instance, when you want to practice, when Tsongkhapa, when he talks about one-pointed concentration, he talks about dhyana paramita, for instance, in the poem. The poem's got the essence of Lanu Dujin means Lanu Dujin means the essence of the Lanu. Sometimes it's called the Nyamgur. It's one of experience of song. So towards the end of it, he goes through each of the paramitas, and when he talks about something, he talks about dhyana, he says that that one point of concentration is such that you're able to focus your mind unwaveringly on any given object that you want to focus on, and you're able to direct it sort of in whatever manner you so choose effortlessly. And that comes from one point of concentration. So what's implicit in that is that until you develop one point of concentration, it's an effort to try to concentrate. And the reason that it's an effort is because you have this resistance to one pointed concentration. Your mind is used to being, going here and there in an undisciplined way, so that it's only if and when you engage in some kind of, mental training to develop one point of concentration will you be able to do so. And so all the elements of the underlying traces of the mental fiction are sort of fighting you from developing one point of concentration. And that, that resistance, that obstacle is the essence of this, what I call indisposition. And that quality is kind of the essence of this type of suffering.
And that's called Samtam.
You mean the one-pointed meditation?
Yeah.
Dhyana is the word for something.
G-Y.
Dhyana.
Could you say it?
DH.
Yeah.
Dhyana. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the word Chan, the Sanskrit or the Chinese word for Zen, becomes Zen, and actually it's based on the Sanskrit word Dhyana. Not Dhyana. Dhyana is knowledge. Jhana is J, N with a tilde over it, a long A, and A. That's jhana.
When it's kind of anglicized, what is it?
J-N-A-N.
Oh, okay.
That's knowledge. Right. Dhyana, D-H-Y-A-N-A, is concentration. Very different words. Okay. So that's a little bit of what this kind of suffering, third kind of suffering is, right? Suffering condition exists, and he says, this third kind of suffering is not only associated with those neutral feelings, but it's all the other elements of your five skandhas, including the external world that you experience in that state. All of those represent or make up the suffering condition existence, right? So in that, so those three types of suffering are one way of explaining the truth of suffering. The truth of suffering is your five skandhas in some recognizing their unsatisfactoriness, either the unsatisfactoriness of pain, or what is a flaw or an imperfection that derives from pleasant experiences, and then this third type of experience. Okay.
Could that be could that be compared then to like pain, neutrality, and not knowing what this is, this conditionality, and then pleasure? Would that be comparable to the five poisons?
Well, there is
ignorance and
correct, exactly. It's coming
exactly.
right here. It's coming right here. Okay, here it says. He says, Dini, here, this is line 12 or so.
I see it.
Yeah. He said, Dini, he's talking about this third type of suffering. Suffering conditions is Ledan Nyomon Baname. Right? This is, what does this consist of? It consists of a state in which you are subject to. You didn't create that neutral feeling. That was produced by your own prior karma and mental fiction. Your prior, some other element of your being in the past created the conditions for you to experience this tainted kind of neutral feeling, where you're still subject to the mental fictions, but you're in a state of sort of equanimity, right? The one thing is that Shenwan means it's not under your control, under the control of karma and mental fictions, which you generate, but you don't do it knowingly or consciously or properly or willingly. And also, also, this neutral state of equanimity where you're still subject to the mental afflictions, right? It says suffering, it means becomes the foundation out of which you will generate the conditions for future suffering of any one of those three kinds, and also nyomongba. So dunel dan nyomongba chima means the future forms of suffering and mental afflictions, right? You're not doing anything, you don't have the knowledge in this state to do anything to put an end to your future suffering. Therefore, the chima nan kiewe sabun means it still contains all the seeds, all the qualities, all the conditions that do nothing but continue the process of generating new karma and new mental affliction. Therefore, therefore, it is a all-pervading kind of indisposition. Right? It is a resultant state, right? The result of past karma and mental afflictions which you have no control over. And because you're still, subject to mental afflictions in this state, what are you going to do? You're going to create new karma and it has all the conditions that will, promote the generating of new karma and new mental afflictions. And so, that's a kind of indisposition, right? That's not a good thing. So that potential to have the mental afflictions be regenerated, you have no capacity to do anything about that. As long as you're still subject to misunderstanding or lack of understanding, lack of knowledge. And so in that sense also, or even if you have some understanding of it, but you can't do anything about it. You don't have one point of concentration. You don't have perfect morality. You're not practicing the three trainings. You're not leading to the state of transcendent realization. And to the extent that you're not, forget it. You're not going anywhere. You're here for the long term. So if you recognize that, that should make you want to do something. Like oh no, now okay, so this is kind of the essence of suffering conditioning existence. There's other explanations that give it a little bit more. There's another term, ayogachema. Ayogachema means a kind of, I think you hear this, I saw some girl yesterday who had yogachema tattooed on her. Yogachema is also a term which is not really, not that familiar in Tibetan Buddhism, but it's drupte, drupa dandewa. And so that refers to a state of safety, a state of, refuge almost. So ayogachema means the absence of state. So you recognize that the state that you're in is not a place where you're in any way protected. So that's another sort of kind of nuance to seeing samsara condition as a flaw and something not to be comfortable.
The yogakshema is gonna like a synonym for nirvana, basically, or
Yogakshema, yeah, it can be.
or it could be what else?
But it's used in epistemology in a completely different meaning, drupte chikpa, which I'm not very knowledgeable about so much, but that really is not kind of it's not related to sort of what's the word? There's a word for your spiritual goals or something like that. It's not related to that. It's more. Yeah, it's not. Yeah. Okay. So it says. Okay. Now he says. So now they've sort of kind of briefly described the three kinds of suffering, and now Tsongkhapa says, in this way, it's not only is our pleasurable experiences, right, a form of suffering of change, in the sense that they don't last, and so when they end, you're disappointed and unhappy. Also, by the very nature, pleasurable sensations, unless you have some kind of self-discipline, right, we're going to have what kind of like a Pavlovian sense of attraction to it. Like pleasure is something that we are drawn to, whether we like it or not. Like, you know, it takes an effort to sort of not give in to the attractive aspect, the pleasant feeling, right? So he says, therefore, chatmagya. And so the average person, when they experience pleasurable things, it's going to strengthen their attachment, right? You can't really do much about it unless you have some kind of will and some kind of, you know, feeling of that there's something, you know, to be wary about in terms of pleasant feelings. He says, then this is one way is this, when suffering arises, then you have a sense of aversion for it. And that's a kind of a reverse attachment. It's kind of the flip side of attachment. It says here, it says kongjo, but it's really a kind of aversion. Right? And from the point of view of achieving nirvana, what you really want is equanimity, in the sense that pleasant things don't draw your attachment, and unpleasant things don't affect you. You know, they don't agitate you and make you want to escape from them. You sort of, it's almost like you say, well, here I am. I'm in an unpleasant situation. I didn't necessarily look for it. It found me, but the best thing that I can do is, you know, grin and bear it and endure it. And that, and that might sound weird, but you know, the arhat is like, the arhat is the one who has that kind of equanimity, that they're not sort of, for instance, the 8 worldly dharmas, right? The 8 worldly dharmas, one is pleasure, one is pain. 2 of them are pleasure and pain. So the proper attitude towards pleasure and pain is indifference. Don't feel any great, you know, desire to seek ordinary pleasures, and don't feel any great kind of, you know, agitation when you experience misfortune. So to be able to sort of endure, that's kind of equanimity. So, you know, at a higher level, it becomes much more subtle. At any rate, so this is what he means when he says hatred will increase when you experience suffering. Well, it's not often, right? If suffering is imposed on you by another person, then it does provoke, you know, some sense of retaliation, feeling that that person deliberately tried to harm you and you want to get back at them. So there is that. But there's also the idea, at a more subtle kind of psychological level, that pain is something that you are averse to. And in a weird way, that aversion is kind of a function of your attachment.
How does that deal with sort of like just basic evolutionary biology? Like,
oh, well, you know, the idea is that you're able to overcome. You're able to overcome. You literally can overcome. And, you know, that's a pretty heady kind of idea. And, you know, not a lot of, you know, whatever, professionals who think that that's not possible, but the idea of Buddhism is that, I mean, the whole idea of, you know, in a way, the samsara is this cycle of biology, right? And Buddhism is saying you can put an end to it. You know, right? Not in a way, you can put an end to it. You can put a stop to it. And, you know, for the Hinayanists, that's the goal in itself. For the Mahayanists, it's not the goal in itself. You're not just trying to put an end to that. You're trying to reach some other kind of transcendent state, which is, in fact, some kind of immortal, you know, enlightenment. So, which is, you know, completely outside of the ordinary world of what do we call it? The natural world, completely beyond the natural world. All right, that's it. Then here he says, "Dedu gaya mimbe nengen lendu tope lula mitapa la tapa zimba." Okay, so he says, Edu Gaya Maimba means those states in which you're not experiencing pleasure, you're not experiencing any kind of pain, but it is suffused by this indisposition, this kind of imperfection that we sort of have to live with. He says that lu means, here lu doesn't mean physical body, it means that collection of the five skandhas is such that when you're in that state, that is the state of equanimity, neutral feelings, what happens then? Mitapavatapaso. We continue to mistakenly view what is impermanent as permanent. Mitapavatapaso su zimba means we've always believed things to persist through time. We don't have any reason to challenge that because we haven't been exposed to the teaching of impermanence. And so, you could even say, even at an unconscious level, but it is active. In Buddhism, it's not really unconscious, it's at a level beyond our overt awareness. But we're just we take it for granted that things persist through time. We take it for granted that there really are pleasurable states. We take it for granted that there is an ego inside our head sometimes. And so we just allow that to persist. And that is kind of the pernicious element of the suffering of conditioned existence, that's the fact that the seeds of future mental afflictions and karma, we're not doing anything to undermine them. And because of that, on we go. So saying, so in that sense, neutral feelings tend to reinforce our ignorance. So in a way, this is like from a spiritual point of view, we have three kinds of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So when we have pleasant experiences, then we should, be on the lookout for attachment. Try to keep that in check. When we have unpleasant feelings, we should not let ourselves lose control and become, upset and agitated and angry. And when we're in a neutral state of mind, that means that neutral state of mind usually that's calm. That's when we can develop some kind of clarity. So we don't waste it. Make use of it. Remind yourself. Think. What is the knowledge that I lack? What is the knowledge I need to cultivate? So that's a kind of appropriate thing to do in everyday life. Take it to the level of lojong, right? Take it to the level of lojong and say, when you're experiencing, something unpleasant, typically, it's like, well, it's not just me. All the samsara, all of the universe in its totality is also subject to these same kinds of things. To remind yourself, and therefore to reinforce your empathy and your compassion. To use it that way. Same way, ignorance. It's not just me that has ignorance. Right? I want to try to alleviate others as well. So, that's kind of bringing it home to everyday, moment-to-moment kind of thing where you can develop a certain kind of mindfulness, a certain kind of reflection. I mean, we don't have the opportunity to do it freely all the time, but some people like note cards and post-its. You can figure out a way to remind yourself every so often. That's a good thing. That's something very that creates a in Tibetan we would say bakchak. Right? Bakchak means some kind of pensive, some kind of inclination to do something positive. And so using your conscious awareness to have those positive thoughts, it's cumulative and it will be very salutary. And it's right there. It's waiting for you to take advantage of it. Okay. And he says, when you develop attachment in relation to pleasant sensations, this is if you allow yourself to generate attachment, what is that doing? then what, by developing attachment for pleasure sensations, towards pleasant sensations, then that attachment is going to be the cause for you to develop the suffering throughout samsara, whether it be in the lower realms or in the higher realms. You're not freeing yourself at all. It says, that attachment is going to manifest itself in any one of the higher or lower realms of samsaric existence, and by its very nature, that is suffering. So your attachment is creating the conditions for suffering. So that's also one of the disadvantages of pleasant, is that it creates that process by which you reinforce your attachment. And that's part of the reason for being mindful or cautious in relation to pleasant, not trying to not allow yourself to be drawn in any more than necessary. Demogini deniki Shedan der nyangin soktan chimarin nendro dumetya. The anger, right, and the aversion, being upset, that unpleasant experiences, that reaction brings you suffering. And here and in the future. There are a lot of discussions about anger. What are the disadvantages of anger? One of them is how unsettling it is for this life. In this life, you can't sleep. Creates conflict with other people. You have good relationships, whether in a practical sense. So Didan Shen means here and in the future, and hatred also creates suffering. Then in the future, hatred in particular does not bring a higher realm birth, only brings some unfavorable kind of rebirth, some suffering. And then ignorance, deniki kere dumeniga mitomachi shupa. So then that the ignorance that is maintained and tolerated and allowed to continue during neutral experiences, it becomes the platform for both of the other kinds of mental fictions, right? And therefore you got mitong supa. Mitong means you're not able to let go of them, you're not able to abandon the hatred or attachment, as long as you're still subject to ignorance. Ignorance is the root cause for both of them. And so if you don't do anything to attack, counteract ignorance, you're bound to perpetuate attachment and anger at some point or another. And so you kind of means you will remain in that state of not being able to get rid of anything, let alone. So here he makes this point. He says, therefore, this is a practice. This is no relating crisis. Regard pleasant feelings as a form of suffering, as a form of having some kind of unsatisfactory or flawed elements to it, and therefore do whatever you can to suppress attachment as much as possible. Then this is the thing about being indifferent to suffering. When you develop painful sensations, in relation to painful sensations, you say, Kumbodi means these heaps, right? These 5 skandhas that I have. It is a collection of entities which, by their very nature, are the causes for experiencing something painful. Our very being sort of is vulnerable to pain, and as long as they're samsaric in nature, we're going to, have to experience something that's unpleasant. It says, "Sungu dar juor samla So it says our very existence is something that is going to force us to have to experience those pangs, right? Sumu means those kind of sharp pains. And samla, and say, just be ready for them, right? Be ready for them, know that they're inevitable, and then, fight any kind of sense of aversion or anger that might be there. So shedanka, the same. It's inevitable. It's just the price of being in samsara. Sorowa tanyum lani, and when you have neutral feelings, then vitakpa tam. Sejin gope rajinjen vitak. So then think of them that they are, well, we think of them as something that is continuous, ongoing. He says it's not something that is stable, that is persisting. It's actually moments that have certain continuity of equanimity to them. So they are impermanent. Seva means they are, because they're impermanent, it means that every moment is a moment that terminates and is followed by a new moment, and then that one terminates. There's nothing you can't. One of the most strong impulses that we have, right? It's like when you get dizzy, what do you want to do? You try to grab a hold of something, you kind of steady yourself, right? It's not there. At the level of impermanence, there's nothing that will steady you. At the level of emptiness, even more so. So you have to be able to realize this, not only the transitoriness of life, and at a deeper level, the lack of self-existence. And kind of, there is there's a term, in the transcendent realization, there are serva and jesa serva. And there's 16 moments of the Four Noble Truths when you attain the direct realization. So one of them relates to, there are 4 of them for each of the Four Noble Truths. There's a chosa, jesa, chosa, jesa. Anyway, there's the word is serva. Serva means shanti. Shanti means patience. But it's remember we were talking about 3 kinds of patience, and I said that there's one kind of patience which when you develop a kind of deeper understanding of Dharma, it kind of inoculates you to samsara, and you become kind of almost impervious to you're detached, and so things don't affect you as much. So that's one way of thinking of it. But there is this notion also of ultimate nature of things is something that we are unfamiliar with. We're not comfortable. Our minds do not naturally gravitate towards emptiness. It's a struggle to try to, gain some kind of awareness or appreciation of what emptiness really means. So there is a point, and the implications of emptiness are, mind-boggling. If we get to the point where we really sort of appreciate it, or we have some understanding of it, it is, kind of an opening kind of thing, and a very radical kind of reinterpretation of how we see things. So there is a phrase which says that you develop a kind of tolerance of the radical nature of what ultimate reality implies, and you sort of, what is kind of unfamiliar with you and even almost difficult to appreciate, you kind of accept it, and in accepting it, it's almost like you come much closer to it. So then that that's kind of what I was suggesting is that that's an element of awareness that is profound and which you can you kind of anticipate, shall we say, in those moments when you're thinking about, oh, life is impermanent. There's nothing to hold on to because it's already gone at the moment that you experience it. And so it's, just if we recognize that, then if we appreciate what that implies, then there can be a certain kind of a peace of mind, almost a very kind of internal, a very kind of personal awareness that can sort of, it's almost like a wave that can come over you, and so that's a kind of patience that comes from awareness, from the kind of realization, which I would maintain is very salutary, very good for you. Good for you. Freeing.
That's why I couldn't hear.
Yeah. So this is a dimukak, right? The dimukak means put a stop to ignorance. So it's like I remember my teacher always used to say, that ignorance and wisdom sort of cannot occupy the same moment. Right? So to the extent that you develop some kind of wisdom, then that sort of supplants ignorance. So, but there is a struggle between. So, to the extent that you can, awaken some kind of awareness in those moments that you have the opportunity to try to do so, you can look for. There is a kind of, there is a point at which that awareness becomes something you can hold on to. It's not some kind of misguided thing that you want to look to for, some kind of safety. The real safety comes in that realization, but it's something that is totally inside your own mind, and that's the only place that you can find it. And if you find it, then to maintain it. That's what you can hold on to, and that will be can be a very stabilizing, quality, and will replace whatever sort of, sense of, what's the opposite of, the kind of, I think a very simple English word with, kind of confusion or, huh? No. I'm saying that, like, not dizziness, but sort of disorientation. Okay, so yes, when that, which is not a comfortable place, right? So when you have that, dissonance, you look for something that will, bring you back to some kind of, feeling of, stability, right? So the thing is that we often look for stability in a bad way, and we find what we think is stability in habitual thinking that's not really good for us. So then if we disengage from that, there can be a certain kind of, in-between state, which is, awkward for us. We have to get kind of beyond that to where some kind of, truly reality, we can sort of, make our way into that place and then find stability there. And that really separates you from samsara.
But you're saying that you have to have the capacity to bear that in between.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think, like we were struggling. What we were talking about for the first hour or so was this. I don't really understand this. It doesn't. Is it really bad for me to try to do this or that kind of thing? Or, like Karen was saying something about, belittling yourself mistakenly because you think somehow Dharma is telling you to do that. So that's indicative of kind of the, um, lack of familiarity with what the teaching is actually telling you, and you just have to kind of, it's, this idea of sort of trying to reprocess an understanding until it can becomes clearer to you, more correct.
But you're saying that I just want to be sure I've understood that. That ability to hold the thing that's not familiar
Well, I said,
becomes an absolute basis for encompassing it later.
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to make too much of it, but I was just saying that, sometimes that in the beginning, in particular, exposure to Dharma it can be unsettling because we don't really know how to sort of follow what it's saying to some larger, like, well, what about that? Or what about this? And you don't have the clarity to be able to kind of, interpret it in all circumstances. And so,
and it seems like that almost, at least for some people, certainly myself, so on one hand, the tendency is to reject it because it's uncomfortable.
Well, that's a whole other,
Yeah.
the idea of, I don't know, a lot of people like, they become creative, or I should say, and they kind of make up their own, well, this sounds nice, so maybe it's like this, and you sort of, that can be a tricky place to go, because you might end up with something that really is not correct, and you might think it's correct. Anyway, let's see if we can finish this, and then that end it. We didn't look at a single one. Okay, so he says, so then use the state of equanimity as an opportunity to remind yourself that you are subject to ignorance, and you tend to misinterpret things habitually, and so therefore sort of make a conscious effort to remind yourself of impermanence and the like. Okay, so here he says, don't allow the three types of feelings to become causes for any one of the three poisons, which is kind of what we're saying. So I've given you this explanation just in this one page. He says that is based upon the Yogacara Bhumi, and there's also Namatel Abadua is one of the related kind of companion works. Not the Yogacara Bhumi per se, one of the 17 pages, but there's some other Nirnaya Sangrahana. One is something like kind of some supplementary descriptions that are based on the Yogacara Bhumi. It says these explanations are according to the views that are expressed in that literature. And then here it says, for example, Okay, so that's a long sentence. That's all one sentence. Okay, so he says, for example, and this is kind of addressing in particular the suffering of conditioned existence. And as you said, the suffering of conditioned existence is something hard to relate to. So here's one way that you can think of it. He says, kurachembukero means like a heavy load. So when you have to carry a heavy load, as long as you are, forced to carry it, as long as you must carry that load, you got to take it from here to there. So as long as you're still, lugging it along, so it says for that duration, it's not going to be pleasant. It's going to be an unpleasant condition. So he's saying that burden, the five skandhas are like a burden because they have a painful They're like something carrying something heavy. But it says, like that, Nyawarimbe Pumbo. Nyawarimbe means the grasping heaps. So the one phrase is the Sa Astrava skandha, right? The skandhas that are associated with the outdoors or the mental vision. Then there's also the skandhas that are grasping. Upadana. Upadana is like one of the 12 limbs of dependent origination. There's craving, and that's followed by grasping. So so that upadana, that word grasping, is also, there are different interpretations. So Abhidharmakosha says it refers to all the mental fictions, represent a kind of grasping. The Chittamatra tends to interpret it as attachment. Grasping means attachment. So, the grasping skandhas are the skandhas that are produced by attachment and which give rise to attachment. So here it says the grasping skandha, the burden of the grasping skandhas, as long as you must, bear them, as long as you must endure them, as long as you have them, then you are going to be subject to suffering. So this is saying that there's something inherently unsatisfactory or unpleasant about samsaric existence, right? Regardless of overtly painful or pleasurable experiences. And I says, well, what is it that is inherently unsatisfactory about our samsaric existence? He says, in these 5 skandhas, the kind of the drag, the obstacle. We have obstacles. We like when we try to accomplish things, we cannot succeed, automatically. Right? Life is an effort. Life is difficult. And the difficulty that we experience in life comes from the fact that we have manifested the mental fictions in the past, and they create their traces in our being are a negative quality that put a drag on our going through life. He says, "Nyomu dungel," right? So it means there is an inherent unsatisfactoriness and an inherent indisposition created by the mental afflictions, which is constantly present in our being. It's not, there's no off switch to it. It's always on. Therefore, as long as we still are subject to that, imperfection, that imperfection which is identified as the suffering of conditional existence, then it says, even though we aren't experiencing overt pain in the present, right? At present. So there may be, there are different periods of time when we're not experiencing obvious pain, but it's just a matter of time before other circumstances will come where we're always vulnerable to pain. And dematak yang means very soon, right? In many different ways, dungel dumakia. Our 5 skandhas are such, we carry around a form of existence in which we are vulnerable to pain at a moment's notice, even if we don't experience it right now. And so if we appreciate that, if we understand that, then that is the essence of the suffering condition of existence. Means every aspect of our existence, that underlying quality of suffering condition of existence is our vulnerability, the imperfection, the resistance, the obstacles that life that we have to carry around with us in our life. It's always present. So that's one thing. So we should recognize that as that something that is never not present, number one, and also that by virtue of that conditioned existence, suffering conditioned existence, the other two kinds of suffering, overt pain, and then the kind of pleasure which is a trap, right? which will delude us into developing attachment, for example. Then the seeds of that are present in the suffering conditioned existence. We carry around the seeds of the mental affliction, so that's how we'll respond to pleasure. That's how we'll respond to pain, for instance. And therefore, the suffering conditioned existence, that's really more pernicious than overt pain and any tendency that we have to develop attachment. So this is fine. So for that reason, we should develop aversion. We should develop some kind of goa means that sense of dissatisfaction with the suffering condition existence. Goa means that alarm, that apprehension, discontent with suffering condition. Don't be complacent. The opposite of complacent. Gamangugomo says do it repeatedly. Cultivate that sense of apprehension as much as you can. So that's one instruction, right? So that's on top of don't allow the three kinds of sensations be causes for perpetuating the three poisons. Also, in particular, try to develop a more appreciation for suffering conditioned existence, and as much as possible, repeatedly reflect on what's untoward about it. Okay, now maybe we're getting closer to 4. Maybe we'll stop here. Here he's going to talk about. I'll just introduce it. This will be good for another time. Right? This is Torah Dewa. He's talking about pleasant sensation. And he qualifies that with an adjectival phrases. Pleasurable feelings are current pleasurable feelings which have the capacity or which have the potential to reinforce and strengthen our attachment, right? Those kinds of sensations, pleasurable sensations. Pelmoche means pelmoche here are saying to a great extent, or for the most part, are created by counteracting, remedying unpleasant feelings. This is this unique Madhyamika point of view of saying that it's the abatement it's really only the abatement of suffering. Temporary abatement of something painful is what we call what's pleasurable. Remember, we talked about this before. It says, so when that happens, when we are able to mitigate some painful situation and we are relieved, we get some relief, that relieved state is what we call something pleasurable. You develop a sense that that's pleasant. But actually, it's just the relief from what was previously more intensely painful something, but it's really not qualitatively different. And it's just a matter of time before it kind of reasserts itself. Right? It says, means there is no such thing as a pleasant sensation, something which is inherently pleasant, other than, or which is, except that what is relief from some kind of painful sensation, temporary relief from some kind of painful sensation. Lamateva means something which, other than that, there is no such thing which is inherently pleasant. So that's the assertion of this particular viewpoint, which we can talk about. So this is this. When we in Chankirti's text, so we're gonna run out of time. But notice on in the Tibetan it says, Dewa Ransemba Yoba Gasa. Dewa means pleasurable sensation. Ransemba means something which has its own essential quality, which is, qualitatively different from those things which we call painful. That they are they're essentially different. Pain is some kind of qualitative experiential state. Pleasure is a fundamentally different kind of experiential state, qualitative. So this is saying not true. There is no inherently pleasant sensation, no such thing. It's like a continuum. A lesser pain is what we call something pleasant. So it's a Dewaran Zemba Yerba means the idea that there is some kind of inherently pleasant experience. Gatwa means to refute that, there are 5 points. So there's this whole series of, the next series of verses in this chapter are, that's the way they're formulated. It doesn't really, the verses themselves don't clearly address that idea. It's through the commentary that the ideas gets developed. But anyway, we'll read about it, and it's an interesting kind of philosophical claim, which I think I mentioned. Bandhu in particular, takes issue with, says that it's mistaken. In Abhidhamma Kosha, he suggests that there were early scholars prior to his time who held such a view, and Chandrakirti makes direct reference to Vasubandhu's criticism of that, and finds fault with Vasubandhu and says, no, that early position is correct. So, that's something, it's an interesting idea which doesn't get a lot of discussion because I think it's somewhat controversial, and it's mentioned in Lam Chomo, but you don't really, outside of the dishes, in a typical Lama discourse, it's not really given a lot of emphasis. I think because it's kind of counterintuitive, you might say, and so this kind of idea of Dharma is you don't try to tell people, even if it's true, you don't want to tell something to somebody that will be so upsetting to them that they would reject. I don't know how much that affects why it's not spoken of more widely. Okay. Anybody? We got a couple minutes if you have a question. Sure.
Actually, it's related to something you said in the beginning of our session, and you said, a lot of people don't see the implications of emptiness in terms of compassion.
Right.
But I'm one of those people. I
Right.
have a very hard time.
No, I know. Yeah.
Like if I'm just unpacking and deconstructing emptiness in terms of there's no fixed self, there's nothing findable.
Right.
How does that translate then to seeing everybody as my mother kind of idea?
Right. Right.
Would you say something on that?
Right. Well, I think one of the things is that the idea of even not emptiness, but even selflessness per se, almost suggests that there is no one who is suffering, and who is the subject of the suffering, and therefore, who are you trying to, help and try to alleviate their suffering? Sort of, it kind of makes it harder to kind of get the impetus really to pursue it. And so, for instance, in Mahayana, there are 3 kinds of compassion. One is then sentient on the Ukraine, not not questioning whether there is a self or not, and just taking the kind of common sense view of persons and thinking of their suffering and wanting to alleviate it, which is kind of the what we typically how we relate to other people's suffering, to the extent that we have empathy. The empathy is manifested that way. Oh, there is somebody who's suffering, and I want to alleviate that individual's suffering. And so that's a legitimate form of compassion. Right? So then there are two further kinds. So the second one is one that the so-called Theravada, who understands that there's only 5 skandhas and there's no Buddhala, or there's no Atma, who is the subject of the suffering, but recognize that there still is. When saying there's no self, doesn't say there's no suffering. It says there's no suffering self, but there's still suffering, and that doesn't diminish or in any way sort of mean that the suffering is not existent. The suffering is just as I would say real, but it's just as valid as whether you associate it with a real person or not. So it's still experienced. There is an experience of suffering, if not by a sentient, a real sentient person, or a person that has some kind of permanent nature to it. Then the third one is the most radical one, which is to say that not only is there no person, but even suffering itself is not self-existent. Right? Suffering, what we call suffering, is an entity that is a mental construct. But that does not mean, the fact that it's a mere mental construct does not mean that it does not exist. Right? It means that it has no independent existence, apart from my perception of it. So again, that doesn't really undermine the kind of the deleterious or the harmful element of suffering, or it doesn't take away from the fact that conventionally the person is in agony, or however you want to characterize it. And even more so, if you look, for instance, at Chandrakirti's Madhyamika Avatar, he opens the text, even though the text is mainly addressing Nagarjuna's doctrine. He opens the text by paying homage to compassion, and he identifies those. He refers, the opening verses talk about 3 kinds of compassion, and he says, the compassion is, he pays homage to compassion in the sense that compassion can be, evoked, or can be triggered by recognizing the suffering that not only you, but that others have to endure, comes from the very fact that they believe they are a real person, or they believe that their psychophysical constituents are self-existent. And that's really the source of their ongoing suffering. And so that knowledge, it's kind of, by having that knowledge, you can appreciate more fully how that lack of knowledge in the object is the source of their suffering. And so that should help to, give it more meaning. that more pity for the fact that their own, you know, lack of understanding is ultimately the source of their suffering, and your understanding of that should heighten your, you know, empathy, your concern for their helplessness. So it's a helplessness as much as the suffering that they endure that should, you know, really move you. Not only are they suffering, they can't do anything about it. That's really, you know, that should move you. More than the suffering. The fact that they, you know, are helpless. So that's very beautiful. And that's one point. The other point that struck me, and the place where it really was clearest to me in Bodhisattva Bhumi was that awareness of empty, and there's a very beautiful discussion on it in the fourth chapter, where Asanga is saying that when you develop a sense of emptiness, that emptiness gives you a kind of equanimity. It doesn't use the word equanimity, but that's how I take it, which is that it's a kind of inoculation. It's a kind of makes you impervious to the agitating nature of samsaric existence. You can become you can navigate samsara without being affected. You know, it doesn't upset you. You because you see things as not being real. So you see that it's saying that everything that you see about samsara, right, is ultimately grounded in your own dualistic thinking. It doesn't mean it doesn't have some validity to it. In fact, that it's not to be discounted as fiction, but that you see that it's not that it's something really out there that you need to kind of react to or brace yourself against. You're real, it's real, and when it becomes when you recognize the kind of illusory aspect of it, then that sense of illusoriness is a kind of is something that in your mind, by remembering that, by recognizing that, it's, you know, it's like it tells you you don't need to invest it with more than it is. I mean, it's coming from you anyway, ultimately, and therefore, if you recognize that, you can be what's that say? You can be, it's a kind of detachment. You can be more, say, you know, like how do you so like using the idea of dreams. Often the image of dreams is that when you are in a dream, some people, you know, are able to recognize they're dreaming when they are dreaming. That's a very rare thing. But typically, when you're dreaming, you don't think of it as dreaming. You think of it as real, and whatever emotional quality it has to it, it's affecting you, right? But when you wake up and you think back on the dream, then you have to say, "Oh, yeah, it was a dream." And so at that point, whatever, you know, apprehension or anxiety or agitation it caused you, you realize it was unwarranted. Okay, so the same thing with understanding emptiness is that the idea of being drawn to things with attachment or become aversion for things because they are, you know, threatening to you. Emptiness allows you to remain, you know, unmoved or unaffected or unagitated by it. It's like it's as if you were, you know, aware that it was a dream, and that's a very sort of powerful tool towards being able to be in samsara and not be upset by it. And so it's kind of like, it's, like if you want to fix something, right? You want to fix something, then you need to sort of be in a calm state of mind to be able to look at it and just sort of in a detached way, put the screwdriver right where it needs to go and turn it, and you're not worrying about, you're not. If there was another, analogy, if you're doing surgery or something, you're not freaking out because you have somebody's, bowels cut open. You focus on what you're doing and you remain sort of calm and detached about it. So you're able to do that in samsara with a sense of emptiness. Now that's a different thing from recognize the compassion part of it, but it's also, it's a very positive quality that you gain from understanding emptiness better. So if you can combine those two, I think what becomes clearer and clearer is that without really understanding emptiness, you may be compassionate, but you really are not able to act as effectively as you otherwise might be able to, as a more, more effective mind, unless you develop that quality of thinking. I think that becomes to me more and more clear, or more and more evident. So it's also without emptiness, it's not impossible. It's not like you can't do anything to help people, but it's a real drawback to not have that quality. And I think I don't think that that's not something that is obvious, and it doesn't get a lot of it's not emphasized. I don't know. Emptiness is really an elusive understanding, and you don't want to say to somebody, if you don't understand emptiness, forget it. You don't have any hope of being a good practitioner. And I'm not saying that, but the other side of it is the immense, and that's what we don't really, I don't think, recognize. Because emptiness, it's kind of intriguing. It's the idea of what it means is alluring because it's so different from the way we ordinarily think of how we see things, and so we're drawn to it. But I don't think we recognize its practical, application and real essential quality for spiritual practice. And, anyway, I don't want to try to present myself as some some great revealer of truth or anything, but yeah, this is my personal feeling. Sorry. Okay. Sorry we didn't get to the verses, but I thought we needed to kind of address some of those ideas about happiness versus suffering. Okay.
Dani rindu pele sonini Katarayanga kanshi sapade Lomit mariki tongro wanam Namjengya we wambora da yushik Dermasum betera kunduyam Jambe yangi zewe jesunye Dembe rimba kunsalam yisho Nyene jube gena nye shisho Rangi jishin dobe langine Shura zewe jambe tagegi Drowe yiki mamba zejene Gewe yu rin zing yu ji. Dema rin jin jogi ma gyabam. Yagyan yambar yu be jogani. Ninje jembo yira gyabayi. Pende de sawa je basho. Se je gawe men jun jin le. Le dru jan ju langi vim begyon. Dandu nangi yila pedajin. Gyawe zeba rindu kyong yuji. Lan san dru betu gyen dru jejing. Gegen se je mi dan mi min kun. Sera gundu gyawe nakwayi. Nam na landan drawa ma gyuji. Kanze teba chola chu chu chu. Sujin rubla zumba de se. Tu de nam gi tatu go je jin. Drashi gyatso chogun gyagyo. Ogun Sanam Yeshe Soso Shin Sanam Yeshe Le Jungwe Kamba Kunyi Sopa.
Okay. Quick announcement. We're out of time, but some of you may remember the former abbot of Serme, who also was an abbot of Tito Country College. Last time he was here, he was still the abbot of Serme. Recently came back to the States. He's going to be in the States for a couple of months. He's at DNKL right now at the moment. Next weekend, he's giving an Avalokiteshvara blessing, something that is kind of preparation for the Nunya practice that they do up there, usually around Vesak. And it's going to be in the East Coast for a couple of months through July, middle of July. And so we've invited him to come to Howell the weekend of the 8th and the 9th, which is in 3 weeks. I think we're still able to stick to our schedule here. And asked him to talk about what he might talk about. So I asked him to give a teaching on a pranidhana, a Manam prayer, which Tsongkhapa wrote, which is called the virtuous beginning. You should call it Tok Tama, which means beginning and end. Literally, that's all it means. But it's a prayer for a virtuous beginning and end. And I think the beginning, middle, and end, and I think it's meant to be, prayers for your entire spiritual life. So famous, well regarded in the Garuda schools. So that's essentially deals with the Laman, but he'll hopefully give some.
What was the name of that prayer again?
Hokkama.
2 days.
Saturday and Sunday
Saturday and
morning, 2 sessions each day.
June 8th and 9th.
Correct. So, in the morning, probably 10 o'clock.
And what was the English for?
It's usually called Prayer for the Virtuous Beginning and End. I believe there's a version of it in a book that Bob Thurman edited on Tsongkhapa. I forget the name of it. It's got a yellow cover, book cover. Quite old. Came out from the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives. There's another book which is more recent by Gavin Kilkey, which is
it's a
collection of devotional poems, and I think it's called
something like the assembly. the moon has a visual symbol.
Yeah, I mean, I can send Andy the title. It's in there. Gavin Kilty used it. I like his translations. He could probably use that as the English word. Anyway, invite you all to come down there. We'll, if you have time and inclination, okay, we'll leave it there. I'll send out an announcement too. All right, good to see you all.
Was anybody thinking of
Okay.
doing anybody thinking of doing the noon
I think about it. I don't know if I'll be able to go.
I've done it twice, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I know it's quite a.
The book is called Splendor of the Autumn Moon.
That's right. Yeah. I know. I guess he likes that practice, and he holds it. It's a yearly thing they do on this.
Do you know if there's back to allowing people or women to stay there? We used to be able to stay there, and